Hey there, it's me, Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. She continued to brush through, and eventually began winding some of the longer bits at the back together into some sort of knot. She held a couple of hairpins in her mouth, and when she was satisfied, she slipped them into the hair itself. I couldn't really see what was going on behind my head, and as her concentration increased, she stopped talking. Then I heard her father's voice from downstairs. "Anita. John's here to see you." "Oh bollocks," she said, still with some pins in her mouth. "I told him not to come around." "Sorry, Steve, I'll just go and see what he wants." "I won't be a minute." She went off down the stairs, and I was left alone once more. I could hear muffled conversation in the hallway downstairs, but couldn't pick out the words. John, the bane of my life. He had even managed to ruin this one evening I had with Anita. I sat staring at myself in the mirror for a few moments, but there was no sign of Anita's imminent return. I picked up a discarded magazine from the floor and began flipping through its pages. The contents were mainly devoted to the charms or otherwise of a range of male pop stars. The interviews were banal, mainly looking at fascinating details about what sort of trousers they wore, or what sort of aftershave. The adverts were for all sorts of perfume or makeup. There seemed to be some sort of mascara war going on between 2 or 3 companies, all of which had invented some new thing that curled more, gave more length, or lasted longer. Next there was a fashion feature on how to wear long dresses. Well, that might be useful, I thought, and began to read it. Shoes were important, apparently. You had to make sure you had the right shoes for the dress, both for appearance, and to make sure that the dress ended up the right length. Then there was a section on slips. Nikki and Anita hadn't been lying, it appeared. Apparently slips were important in making sure that skirts and dresses hung properly. It seemed that some dresses had them sort of built in if they were lined, otherwise you had to wear a separate one. I wondered whether Tanya's bridesmaid's dress was lined. The article then gave me some advice on bras. Could I, or should I, do without when I was wearing my dress? It seemed that it partly depended on what sort of back the dress had, or whether it was strapless. I was then told that there was a range of bras I could choose from, including some that had no straps at all. There seemed very little advice for a 15-year-old boy without boobs who was having to wear a long dress, I thought to myself drolly. I was awakened from all this by the sounds of footsteps on the stairs. Anita was obviously coming back. I put the magazine down and waited for her to appear in the bedroom door. She did, but not alone. John was with her. My mouth fell open. I had never actually met the demon, but now there he was, standing and looking at me in all the glory of my makeup, my half-finished hair, and my tiny little skirt. "Sorry, Sarah," Anita was saying. "John's just staying for a little while. He couldn't keep away from me." She raised her eyes in exasperation. "John, this is Sarah." "Hello," he said, with his deep baritone. I nodded in response. He wasn't particularly tall or handsome, just a regular 18-year-old guy. His eyes looked bloodshot and dim. I knew from Anita that he was some sort of laborer, and I could see through his t-shirt that his muscles were quite well defined. "Go on in, John, I'll go and get us some drinks." I was outraged. Anita was leaving me alone in her bedroom with this Neanderthal. He lumbered across the room and sat himself down clumsily on the bed. "You at Anita's school then?" he growled, picking up some of Anita's school books and looking at them. "Yes," I replied firmly, but impolitely. "I never liked school, waste of time," he opined, throwing the books down. He looked at me again, and I hated him even more. "Got a boyfriend?" he spluttered. No, I haven't, I said in my most unfriendly tone. I could fix you with one of me mates, he offered. I don't think so, thanks. Suit yourself. He got up and thumped across to the other side of the bedroom. He flipped the television on carelessly. He clicked through one or two channels, before settling on one, and then lay himself back down on the bed. I noticed that his shoes were dirty on the underside. I picked the magazine back up, to see if I could learn more, but was unable to concentrate on it with John filling up the room. You from Newcastle, he said, not taking his eyes off the television. Yes, I replied, although I wasn't sure if it had been a statement or a question. I hate Newcastle, the football team anyway. I've never been there, don't want to either. It's a very nice town, I said curtly. He ignored me, and began to giggle at some incident in the program he was watching. This impasse seemed to go on forever, but eventually I heard Anita's footsteps coming back up. She struggled with the door a little, so I got up to help her. She came through with a tray and 3 cups of coffee. Now you're just having this, and then going, right, John, she said to him. He hadn't even bothered to look up when she came in. Whatever, he mumbled. Anita put the tray down on the bedside table, and rousing himself into motion, he pulled her onto the bed beside him. I sat back on the stool, feeling rather like a lemon. He waited until the adverts came on in the program he was watching, and then began to snog Anita. I was further outraged, but could think of nothing to do about it. I picked up the magazine, and tried to read again. Your coffee's over here, Anita told me. I looked up. The program had obviously started again, because John's bulky frame was turned towards the telly again, and Anita had extricated herself from him. Thanks, I said, forcing a smile. Anita shrugged her shoulders, as if to say there was nothing she could do about it. I'll get it in a minute, I went on. The magazine told me all about period pains and something called premenstrual tension. Apparently 50% of me would get this at some stage in my life. I was strongly advised to watch my diet, especially at that time of the month, but to go and see a doctor if I was ever irregular, or bleed more heavily than usual. There was suddenly a staccato and lumbering. Ha! 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 From the bed. John had obviously found something on the telly amusing. His arm was draped carelessly around Anita, who seemed to have fallen asleep. I turned back to my magazine. The next section was on summer fashion, and particularly denim wear. It seemed that this summer, I would have the choice of wearing both long and short skirts, shorts, and trousers that ended halfway between my leg and ankle, as well as regular jeans. It did occur to me that as fashion advice went, it was a bit non-specific. My choice, it would appear, should be guided by my leg type. What sort of leg type did I have? I idly wondered. The magazine offered to tell me if I could answer 10 questions. I looked over at the bed. There were more adverts on now, so John and Anita were snogging again. I quickly let my eyes return to the page, angry with the world. Right, first question, were the top of my thighs wider than my hips? I had no idea. I looked over the magazine to see, but in my little skirt, it was something of a challenge. I wondered if I could pull it up to see. I looked surreptitiously over to the bed, and decided against it. Showing my knickers off to John didn't seem a particularly appealing idea. Much as the magazine was taking my mind off things, I was beginning to find the situation intolerable. I stood up, and rather than approach the bed for my coffee, decided to head off to the bathroom. Are you all right, Sarah? Anita asked, having retrieved her mouth from John's intermittent attentions. Yeah, just going to the toilet. I responded. I walked into the room and shut the door, leaning against it. I had hated John before as a concept, as the boyfriend. Now I had a real figure to hate, and somehow it made me glad. The fact that he was older than me, had a job, and had a car had all played on my inferiority complex. Now I had met him, I could see that he was as thick as a brick with the manners of a rutting boar. I felt smug and superior. Anita was bound to see that, all things considered, I would make a far more appealing boyfriend. The fact that I was wearing more makeup than her, and a short mini skirt didn't enter my equation. Bored, I wandered over to the sink and looked into my reflection in the mirror. Half done, my hair was in a bit of a mess. Anita had managed to pin it up at the back at one side, but not the other, and it looked entirely unbalanced. I put my hands to the back to look for the hairpins she had put in, found them and pulled them out. I shook my head, and the wig tumbled free. I studied the way Anita had made me up. It really did make me look older somehow. I looked like I was more like to be a college girl than a school one. There was a hairbrush behind the sink. I picked it up and idly began brushing my wig, gazing at myself with interest in the mirror. Suddenly I put the brush down. What on earth did I think I was doing? I was standing in someone else's bathroom, wearing girls' clothes, and preening myself. I shook my head. This was all beginning to get to me. I had to reassert my masculinity, regardless of Anita's request for me to start thinking of myself as a girl, otherwise I would go mad. For effect, I flushed the toilet and walked back across the landing to Anita's bedroom. They were still lying on the bed. John was watching the television intently, while Anita was drinking her coffee. She smiled at me as I came in, though John didn't look up. "Are you okay?" she asked, smiling. I forced a smile back.
"Yeah."
"John's going in a minute, aren't you, John?" she asked pointedly. "Not finished me coffee yet," he stated bluntly, and then, lifting his buttocks up, farted. John admonished Anita. "Better out than in," he grunted, without taking his eyes from the television. I sat back down on the stool and looked around for something to do, anything rather than have to pay attention to John. I was bored with the magazine, so left that. There was a row of nail varnish bottles on the table. I picked one up to look at, thinking to myself that I had been lucky Nikki hadn't wanted me to wear this sort of thing as well. I looked at the contents, a bright pink. I glanced over to the bed, another intermission, another snogging session. I tried to open the thin black top of the bottle. I had always liked the smell of nail varnish, and had decided to take it sniff. It was stiffer than I had imagined, and I had to use the whole of my hand to get the thing off. Flakes of dried pink fell onto my lap, but I was rewarded by the sweet smell arising from the bottle. I glanced back at the bed. John had slipped his hand up Anita's jumper, and they were still snogging. I turned my attention back to the bottle in my hands. Gently I eased the brush out, and put it to my nose. Heaven! I slipped it back into the bottle quickly, feeling guilty about my little vice. Neither John nor Anita were taking any heed of me. I held my left hand out in front of me. Was it really as small as Nikki and Anita had said? I looked at it curiously. I knew it wasn't large, but I suppose I was used to it. I examined the small ring on my finger, with its heart-shaped design. It was quite sweet in a way. It certainly gave my whole hand a feminine appearance, and I suppose that if my hands were larger, that would have been more difficult for it to do. Thank heavens Anita and Nikki hadn't thought to put nail varnish on me that morning, I thought to myself. If they had, then my hands really would have looked girly. I tried to imagine what they would look like. I stared at my nails. I had read somewhere that girls tended to judge a bloke by his nails, so I had always taken some care with mine. I certainly never bit them, and tried to make sure they were clean. They'd probably look all right with nail varnish on them, I thought. Then suddenly it occurred to me, while I had nothing else to do, I could try it. No, I said to myself, it was a ridiculous idea. What on earth would Anita think of me if I started voluntarily putting nail varnish on myself? I looked over to the bed. At this moment in time it looked as if Anita wouldn't care if I painted the room with it. I pouted to myself and looked back to my hand and the bottle. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.